The rain came down in sheets across Mayfair, turning the cobblestones into mirrors that reflected the gas lamp's golden glow. Duke Edward Harrington guided his carriage toward Lady Catherine Whitmore's townhouse, listening to her discuss wedding arrangements with the detached interest of a man who had learned to smile at appropriate intervals. "The guest list has reached 300, Catherine said, adjusting her emerald silk gloves that cost more than most families earned in a year. "Mother insists we cannot exclude the Pembrokes, though I find them dreadfully dull." Edward murmured something agreeable, his mind already drifting to tomorrow's meeting about crop yields and tenant agreements. At 35, he had perfected the art of appearing present while his thoughts wandered elsewhere, usually to ledgers, investments, and the responsibilities that came with managing one of England's largest estates. Then he saw her. Mary Hayes stood at the corner of Park Lane, sheltering under a shop awning that provided almost no protection from the storm. She wasn't alone. In her arms, she held 2 bundles wrapped in what appeared to be her own shawl, revealing her threadbare dress beneath. The fabric was so worn Edward could see where it had been mended multiple times, brown wool patched over gray cotton patched over something else entirely, the original weave barely visible through the desperate repairs. Even from the carriage, he could see she was trembling violently. His heart stopped. Mary. The woman he had loved with desperate, consuming intensity 2 years ago. The woman he had left because a duke's duty did not include marrying a vicar's daughter with no fortune, no title, and no connections that could benefit the Harrington estate. The woman who had disappeared from London society 18 months ago without explanation, leaving only whispered rumors in her wake. The woman who was now holding 2 infants in the pouring rain. Edward? Catherine's voice seemed to come from underwater, distant and distorted. "The carriage has stopped. Is something wrong?" Mary shifted one of the babies to her shoulder with the practiced ease of someone who had done this motion 1,000 times, and Edward saw the child's face for the first time. Even through the rain-streaked window, even in the dim gaslight, the recognition hit him like a physical blow to his chest. Dark hair that caught the light. A strong jawline already visible even in infancy. The unmistakable Harrington features that had marked his family for 6 generations. His hands began to shake so violently he had to clasp them together to hide the tremor. "Edward, you're staring at that woman," Catherine said, her tone sharpening with the first edge of suspicion. "Do you know her?" Mary looked up at that exact moment, perhaps sensing his gaze through the storm. Their eyes met across the rain-soaked street, hers gray like storm clouds, his the distinctive Harrington steel. He saw shock flash across her face, followed immediately by something that looked like pure terror. She pulled the infants closer to her chest in a protective gesture that spoke of fierce maternal instinct, then turned away, disappearing into the downpour with hurried, desperate steps. "Drive on," Edward heard himself say, though his voice sounded hollow, as if someone else were speaking through his mouth. As the carriage pulled away, he couldn't help himself. He turned to look back through the rear window. Mary was gone, swallowed by the storm and the darkness of London's evening streets. But the image of those 2 small faces remained burned into his mind like a brand, searing and permanent and impossible to ignore. The mathematical calculation was unavoidable, undeniable. 2 years since he had ended their relationship, choosing duty over his heart. 18 months since her mysterious disappearance from London, with only vague mentions of illness and family matters in the country. Infants who appeared to be approximately 6 months old, perhaps slightly older. The timing was perfect. Or terrible, depending on how one looked at it. "Edward, are you unwell?" Catherine asked, studying his face with increasing concern. "You've gone quite pale. Should we call for Dr. Bennet?" "I'm fine," he lied, tasting ash in his mouth. "Simply tired from the day's business." But he wasn't fine. Because he had just seen his former love, the only woman he had ever truly wanted, the one he thought about in the quiet moments before sleep, standing in the rain holding what could only be his children. Children he knew nothing about. Children being raised in obvious, desperate poverty while he lived in a Mayfair townhouse with 17 rooms he rarely entered. And in 2 months, He was scheduled to marry another woman entirely in a ceremony that would cost more than those infants would see in their entire lifetimes. The question that would haunt him through the sleepless night ahead, keeping him pacing his study until dawn, was brutally simple: what kind of man had he become? Edward couldn't focus during dinner at the Whitmore residence. The elaborate meal, 5 courses, each more extravagant than the last, turned to sawdust in his mouth. Catherine's mother, Elizabeth Whitmore, held court at the head of the table, discussing wedding details with the precision of a general planning a military campaign. Flower arrangements. Seating charts for 300 guests. The orchestra that would play during the wedding breakfast. Edward nodded mechanically, his mind replaying that single image, Mary in the rain, those 2 small faces, the fear in her eyes when she recognized him. The threadbare dress that had been patched so many times it was more patch than dress. The way she'd pulled the babies closer, as if he might try to take them from her. After dinner, Catherine cornered him in the drawing room while her parents entertained other guests. She was perceptive it was one of the qualities that had made her seem like a suitable match. "Something is wrong," she said quietly, her blue eyes searching his face. "You barely touched your dinner. Was it that woman in the rain?" Edward considered lying. It would be easier. But Catherine deserved at least partial honesty. "An old acquaintance. I was surprised to see her in such reduced circumstances." "An acquaintance," Catherine repeated, her tone suggesting she knew it was more. "Edward, we marry in 2 months. If there is something I should know, anything that might affect our future, I would prefer to hear it now." "There's nothing that affects us," Edward said quickly. Too quickly. Catherine studied his face for a long moment. "I see. Well, if you change your mind about that assessment, I hope you'll tell me." That night, alone in his study, Edward couldn't sleep. He poured himself brandy and stood at the window, watching rain continue to fall over London's wealthy district. Somewhere out there, in the slums of Clerkenwell, Mary was probably awake too, but not by choice. She was likely feeding crying infants, changing soiled nappies, trying to stretch whatever meager resources she had to survive another day. 2 years ago, he had met Mary Hayes at a charity function for the poor. She had been arranging food baskets with quick, efficient movements when Edward made a casual comment to another gentleman about the poor needing to work harder rather than relying on charity. She had overheard. And unlike every other woman he'd known, she hadn't simpered or stayed silent. "Have you ever tried to work hard on an empty stomach, Your Grace?" she'd asked, turning to face him directly with those storm-gray eyes. "Or find employment when you have no connections, no education provided by expensive tutors, and no one willing to give you a chance because your clothes are too shabby to inspire confidence?" The entire group had gone silent. No one spoke to a duke that way. Especially not a vicar's daughter with flour on her dress. Edward had been stunned. Then intrigued. Then, over the following weeks, utterly captivated. Their courtship had been secret by necessity. They'd met in gardens after dark, in quiet corners of churches, in bookshops where the aristocracy rarely ventured. She'd made him laugh. She'd challenged every assumption he'd made about class, duty, and what it meant to live a meaningful life. She'd seen him not as a title or an estate to be managed, but as a man flawed, uncertain, trying to find meaning in inherited responsibility. "I love you," he'd told her one evening in a secluded garden. "God help me, Mary, I love you more than I've ever loved anything." "Then marry me," she'd said simply. "We'll find a way to make it work." But they hadn't found a way. His grandmother, Margaret Harrington, the formidable Dowager Duchess, had discovered the relationship. The confrontation had been brutal. "You will end this infatuation immediately," Margaret had said, her voice cold as winter stone. "The Harrington line does not marry vicars' daughters. Your father nearly bankrupted this estate with his reckless choices. I will not allow you to compound that disgrace by throwing away your duty for a momentary passion." She'd been right about one thing: his father had made catastrophically poor investments. Edward had spent 10 years rebuilding the family finances. A marriage to Catherine Whitmore would secure the final pieces needed to guarantee the estate's stability. So he had ended it. He'd gone to Mary's tiny lodgings in Clerkenwell and told her the truth. "I cannot marry you. I have responsibilities to my family, to the estate, to the hundreds of people who depend on me. A duke's wife must bring connections, alliances, resources. You bring none of those things." He'd expected tears, anger, accusations. Instead, Mary had simply looked at him and said quietly, "I understand, Your Grace. I've always known this was temporary. I just didn't expect temporary to hurt quite this much." Then she'd thanked him. "Thank you for being honest. I'll always treasure what we had, even if it wasn't enough." He'd left feeling like a coward. But he'd convinced himself it was the right decision. 6 weeks later, Mary had disappeared from London. Her father said only that his daughter had gone to stay with relatives in the country. Her health required it. Now, sitting in his study as dawn broke, Edward realized the truth with sickening clarity. Her health that required country air. Her disappearance exactly when pregnancy would have begun to show. She'd been pregnant. With his children. And she had chosen to bear them alone rather than come to him. The question that burned through him was, why? Edward stood abruptly. He needed answers. He needed to see her again. The next morning, Edward summoned Thomas Reed to his Mayfair townhouse. Reed was a former Bow Street runner who handled discreet inquiries. Sharp eyes, unremarkable appearance perfect for blending into any crowd. "I need you to find someone," Edward said without preamble. Discreetly. Mary Hayes. Approximately 30 years old. Daughter of an Anglican vicar. Last known in Clerkenwell. Reed pulled out a notebook. "Any particular reason?" "That's not relevant to your task." Reed nodded. "Anything else?" Edward hesitated. "She may be caring for 2 infants. Approximately 6 months old." Something flickered in Reed's eyes, understanding. But he simply nodded. "I'll have information within 24 hours. Meanwhile, in Clerkenwell. Mary Hayes woke at dawn to and crying a high, insistent wail. Before she could sit up, John joined in, their twin telepathy ensuring their mother never slept more than 2 hours at a stretch. "I'm coming, my loves," she murmured, her voice rough with exhaustion. Her single room on Rose Court contained everything she owned, a narrow bed that creaked with every movement, a small coal stove that barely kept the winter chill at bay, a basin for washing that she had to fill from the communal pump 3 floors down, and a makeshift cradle for the twins constructed from a drawer and some blankets. She lifted and first always Anne, who was smaller and whose cries turned frantic quickly. Then John, solid and serious even at 6 months old. "Good morning, sweet ones," she whispered, settling into the only chair. "Did you sleep at all?" John sneezed directly into her face. And laughed, a sound that made Mary's heart overflow despite her bone-deep exhaustion. This was her life now. Caring for 2 infants alone. Working as a seamstress during the brief moments when they both slept, which was rarely and never at convenient times. Her fingers were bleeding again. She looked down at them, cracked, raw, the skin around her nails split from washing in ice-cold water and pushing needles through fabric for hours each day. She'd bled onto the white silk she was mending yesterday. Had to rewash it 3 times, wasting soap she couldn't afford to replace. The room smelled of damp stone and yesterday's cabbage, the smell of poverty that clung to everything no matter how hard she scrubbed. The November cold seeped through walls that never dried, making the baby's thin blankets feel inadequate no matter how many times she wrapped them. And was rooting against her chest, hungry. Mary looked at the milk warming on the stove. She'd watered it down yesterday to make it last until she could afford more. The babies were getting thinner. She could see it in their faces, feel it when she held them. She was failing them. The thought came unbidden, unwelcome. She pushed it away, but it crept back in the quiet moments. What if she couldn't do this? What if love wasn't enough? A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Mrs. Ellen Cooper stood there holding a basket. "Saw you in the rain last night," Mrs. Cooper said. "Thought you might need some bread. There's soup too." Mary's throat tightened dangerously. "Mrs. Cooper, I can't keep accepting." "You can and you will, girl." The older woman peered past Mary into the sparse room. "Those babies need feeding proper, and you can't do it on an empty stomach. Besides, little Ann smiled at me last week. Consider it payment." After Mrs. Cooper left, Mary sat with the still warm bread and felt tears sting her eyes. Kindness from near strangers kept her alive week after week. But it also reminded her how desperately alone she truly was. Last night, seeing Edward's carriage, seeing his face in the window. She'd run. Pulled the babies close and fled, terrified he might stop the carriage, might see the children properly, might recognize his own features in John's face. What would he do if he knew? Would he take them away to be raised as proper Harringtons while Mary was paid off? Or worse, acknowledge them but refuse to claim them publicly, turning John and into shameful secrets? No. Better he never know. Mary looked at John and Anne, now drowsy after feeding. "It's just us. But that's enough. That has to be enough." She was trying to convince herself. That evening, Thomas Reed worked quickly. By evening, he had an address and a situation that made even his professional detachment falter. Rose Court, Clerkenwell. 3rd floor, rear room. The poorest room in a building that wasn't particularly prosperous to begin with. He'd gathered confirmation from 3 sources. Mary Hayes lived alone with twin infants. A boy and a girl. Approximately 6 months old. No husband. No male visitors. No father listed anywhere. She worked as a seamstress, taking piecework from a dress shop. Barely made enough to cover rent and basic food. Neighbors spoke well of her, respectable despite her situation, quiet, worked herself to exhaustion, asked for no charity. "The boy is called John," Reed reported to Edward that evening. "Larger of the twins, dark hair. The girl is Anne. Smaller, auburn hair like her mother." He paused. "Your Grace," the landlord mentioned unprompted, "that young John has remarkable eyes. Steel gray. Very distinctive in an infant. He said they reminded him of." Reed trailed off meaningfully. Edward's breath caught. "The Harrington eyes." "Thank you, Mr. Reed." After Reed left, Edward sat with the report. Cold facts confirming what his heart knew. John and Hayes. His son and daughter. 6 months old. Living in poverty while he occupied 17 rooms. He'd failed them. Failed Mary. The question now was, what kind of man would he choose to become? Edward stood, grabbed his coat, and left. He found himself outside Rose Court near midnight, staring up at a dim light in a 3rd-floor window. Mary was awake. Perhaps feeding babies by candlelight. Perhaps mending clothes to earn another few pence. Surviving. Alone. Because of his choices. Edward raised his hand to knock. Then stopped, paralyzed. What right did he have to disrupt the life she'd built? He stood there for nearly an hour, frozen by indecision and guilt. Finally, he turned away. But he would return. He had to. Because those children were his. And Mary deserved to hear from his own lips what he now understood. He had made the worst mistake of his life when he let her go. And he would spend however long it took trying to make it right. Edward returned to Rose Court at dawn 2 days later. This time, he didn't hesitate. He climbed the narrow stairs, his fine boots loud on worn wood. The building smelled of poverty-boiled cabbage, damp walls, too many people in too little space. When he reached the rear room, he heard babies crying in twin harmony. Then Mary's voice, soft and exhausted, singing a lullaby. He knocked firmly. The singing stopped. Footsteps approached, hesitant, wary. The door opened a crack. Mary's face appeared, exhausted beyond anything he'd seen, wary as a cornered animal, achingly familiar. Recognition flooded her features, followed by panic. "No," she said, pushing the door closed. "You have no right to be here. Leave." Edward caught the door. "Mary, please. I just want to talk. 5 minutes. There's nothing to discuss." Behind her, the baby's cries intensified. She glanced back, torn. "You need to leave. Now. Are they mine?" The question hung between them like a blade. Mary's face went carefully blank. "That's none of your concern." "It's every bit my concern if I'm their father." "Father?" Mary's laugh was bitter. "A father is present. A father chooses his children. You chose your duty. These children are mine alone." Behind her, one of the baby's cries reached a frantic pitch. Mary physically flinched. "Let me in," Edward said quietly. "If only to see them. Then I'll leave. I don't want you here. I don't want them to know you exist. I don't want." Her voice cracked. She steadied it. "Please, Edward. Just go. Live your life. We're managing." "You're not managing. You're surviving. Surviving is more than some people manage." "I'm grateful." The crying intensified into dual wails. Mary's jaw tightened. She was desperate to go to them but unwilling to let him past. Finally, she stepped back. 5 minutes. Then you leave and don't come back." Edward entered and his heart broke. One room. A narrow bed. A barely functional stove. A table covered with sewing. And in a makeshift cradle, 2 red-faced infants crying in tandem. Mary moved immediately to them, lifting both with practiced ease. "Hush now, sweet ones. Mama's here." "I'm so sorry." Gradually, the crying subsided. Edward stood frozen. The boy John turned his head, and Edward saw his own eyes. The Harrington gray, unmistakable. The baby studied him with solemn intensity. The girl had Mary's auburn hair, but the Harrington features were there in her chin, her brow. "They're mine," Edward breathed. "They're mine," Mary corrected fiercely. "I carried them. I birthed them alone in a charity hospital while you attended balls. I fed them and clothed them every single day while you knew nothing. They are mine. Were you ever going to tell me?" Mary's eyes flashed. "Tell you what? That your moment of passion resulted in consequences? You could have paid me off, set us up somewhere discreet. That's not what I would have done. Isn't it? You made yourself clear 2 years ago. A duke's wife must bring connections. I bring nothing. And I would not turn my children into obligations you resent." Edward moved closer. "May I hold him? Please." Mary's arms tightened. "Why? So you can satisfy curiosity and leave?" "No. So I can understand what I've missed." After a long moment, Mary extended John toward him. "Support his head." Edward took his son and felt the world realign. John was solid, real. He smelled of milk and something sweet. His tiny hand gripped Edward's finger with surprising strength. "Hello, John," Edward whispered. "I'm your father." And began fussing, reaching toward her brother. "She doesn't like when he's away from her," Mary explained. "They're bonded." Edward looked at Mary properly. She was thinner, exhausted. Her dress was patched multiple times. Her hands were red and cracked. He could see where the skin had split around her fingernails, some wounds still raw and bleeding. "How did you survive?" he asked quietly. When you were pregnant. When they were born. That's not your concern. It is now. It's not. Mary's voice hardened. You gave up any right when you chose your Duchess to be. This is my consequence. Mine to bear. I can't do that. Why not? You've done it for 2 years. Because I didn't know. The volume startled John. Edward immediately gentled his tone. I didn't know, Mary. If I had. If you had known, what? You would have married me? Mary's laugh was knowing. No. You would have done exactly what I said, set us up in some cottage, visited when convenient, and slowly resented us. I knew that. That's why I didn't tell you. Edward wanted to argue. But looking at her strong, protective, fiercely independent, he realized she was right. 2 years ago, he would have done exactly that. You're right, he said quietly. 2 years ago, I would have. I was a coward hiding behind duty. I chose comfort over courage. Mary blinked, not expecting this admission. But I'm not the same man now. Seeing you in the rain, seeing them. I can't walk away. You have no choice. We don't need you. Maybe you don't. But they deserve to know their father. And I deserve the chance to be someone they can be proud of. And reached for Edward with clear intent. She wants you, Mary said, surprised. She doesn't usually warm to strangers. I'm not a stranger. I'm her father. Mary's eyes filled with tears. She fought. Being a father is more than biology. It's being present every day. Consistent. Choosing them every time even when it costs everything. Can you do that? Can you be present when it means missing social events? Consistent when it disrupts your business? Can you choose them when it costs you everything society says matters? Edward looked at John in his arms, then at and reaching for him, then at Mary. I don't know, he admitted. I've never been a father. I'll probably fail in 1,000 ways. But I want to try. Please, Mary. Let me try. Mary studied his face, hope warring with fear. Finally, she spoke. You want to try? Fine. You may visit. 1 hour, 3 times per week. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. 10 in the morning. If you miss a single visit without a legitimate emergency, you're done. No excuses. Because nothing is more important than keeping your word to your children. Agreed. And you don't give us money. If you want to be part of their lives, you be their father. Not our benefactor. Their father. That's all. When can I start? You just did. It's Tuesday. You have 43 minutes left. For 43 minutes, Edward sat holding both his children, learning their cries, memorizing the weight of them. Mary watched, arms crossed, still wary. When the hour ended, Edward handed them back reluctantly. Thursday morning? He asked. 10 o'clock? Thursday morning. Don't be late. As Edward descended the stairs, he felt fundamentally altered. Broken open. He had a son. A daughter. And less than 2 months before his marriage to Catherine. Something would have to give. The question was, would he finally have the courage to choose love over duty? Underscore 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 underscore. Before we continue, we need to tell you something. Stories like this real, raw, emotionally devastating stories, they take hours to research, craft, and perfect. We don't do this for the algorithm. We do it because these truths need to be told. If this story is already making you feel something, If Mary's struggle is breaking your heart, do something about it. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel. Share this with someone who needs to understand what real sacrifice looks like. Because if you don't, stories like this disappear. And people who need to hear them never will. Now, let's see what Edward does next. Edward managed 3 visits Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday before his grandmother summoned him to Harrington Hall. Margaret Harrington did not make requests. She issued summons. He found her in the library, tea already prepared, a bad sign. Sit, she commanded. Edward sat. Margaret poured tea with ritual precision. Elizabeth Whitmore has expressed concerns. Her daughter reports you've been peculiarly inattentive. She wonders about your commitment to the marriage. Edward set down his cup. The marriage is still 7 weeks away. Yet you seem to be spending your mornings in Clerkenwell. Her sharp eyes fixed on him. Why would the Duke of Harrington have business in the slums? No point in lying. I have 2 children. John and Anne. 6 months old. Their mother is Mary Hayes. Margaret's expression didn't change. She sipped her tea thoughtfully. The vicar's daughter. And she became pregnant. Yes. Before I ended the relationship, though I didn't know. Of course you didn't. She kept it secret. Intelligent girl. If she'd told you, you would have married her out of obligation and regretted it forever. She saved you from yourself. The assessment startled Edward. You're not angry? I'm practical. Anger is unproductive. The situation exists. Now we manage it. Manage it how? Obviously. The children are illegitimate, but they're Harrington blood. The solution is straightforward: provide Miss Hayes with a generous settlement. Enough to live comfortably far from London. The children can be acknowledged privately as distant wards. You proceed with your marriage to Catherine. Everyone maintains respectability. No. Margaret's eyebrow rose. No? I'm not sending them away like inconvenient baggage. I'm not treating my children like complications to be managed with money. And I'm not marrying Catherine while their mother raises them alone in poverty. Then what do you intend to do? Edward stood. I won't repeat father's mistakes. Margaret's expression flickered. What do you know of your father's mistakes? I know he chose duty over every personal connection. I know he built this estate's wealth back but barely knew his own son. I remember him at his desk, always working, never smiling. And I know that on his deathbed, he told me that money and title mean nothing if you're completely alone at the end. And he was alone, grandmother. Utterly alone. Is that really the legacy you wanted for him? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried pain. Charles was my son. I loved him. But he was weak in ways that mattered. He let passion nearly bankrupt this family with reckless investments. I had to teach him that duty must come before personal desire. And he died alone. Wealthy, respected, and alone. It's better than disgrace and ruin. Is it? Edward moved to the window. Grandmother, I held my son for the first time days ago. He has my eyes. He gripped my finger like he was holding on to something precious. And Anne looked at me like she was trying to understand who I was, whether I could be trusted. He turned to face her. For 6 months, they've existed without me. Mary carried them alone, birthed them in a charity hospital, raised them in a single room while I lived in comfort. She was protecting them from me. From the man I was when I let her go. The man who would have seen them as obligations rather than gifts. And what man are you now? I'm trying to become someone my children can be proud of. Someone who has courage to choose what's right instead of what's comfortable. Margaret stood slowly. She moved beside him at the window. Do you know why I push you so hard toward duty? She asked finally. Because I failed your father utterly. I thought if I taught him duty above all else, he would be strong. Instead, I taught him to ignore his own heart so thoroughly he lost the ability to feel anything at all. Edward stared at his grandmother. He told me once, near the end, Margaret continued, her voice barely above a whisper. He said he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt genuinely happy. Not work accomplishments, not restored fortune. None of it. He'd lost the ability to feel joy because I'd systematically trained it out of him. She turned to Edward. I don't want that for you. But I also cannot watch you destroy everything your father rebuilt. There must be some middle path. The middle path is honoring my children without hiding them. Providing for Mary without treating her as a problem. And not marrying Catherine when I don't love her. Catherine's family will be furious. The social consequences. I'll deal with the consequences. Margaret studied his face. You've changed. You've become someone I don't recognize. Is that bad? A small smile touched her lips. No. It might be the first truly brave thing you've done in your life. Does that mean you'll support me? The smile faded. I won't oppose it. But I won't protect you from the fallout. You're choosing a difficult path. Society is unforgiving. As long as I have John and Anne, I won't be alone. Margaret placed a hand on his arm. Then go. Break your engagement honestly. And bring that girl and those children here where they belong. 3 days later, Edward requested a private meeting with Catherine. She received him in the morning room, elegant in pale blue. You look serious, she observed. Should I be concerned? You should be very concerned. Catherine's composure didn't waver. Let's have it plainly. I can't marry you. I apologize for the disruption, but I cannot proceed in good conscience. Because of the woman in Clerkenwell. The one with children. Edward blinked. You know? I suspected from the moment you went pale in the carriage. Then you started disappearing. I knew you'd been involved with someone, a vicar's daughter. What I didn't know was that there were children. The clinical assessment sparked anger. They're not children in the abstract. They're my son and daughter. John and Anne. Real people. And I cannot marry you when their mother is struggling because of choices I made. How noble. Catherine's tone wasn't warm. Tell me honestly. If you hadn't seen her that night, would you have married me? Yes. To my shame. Then perhaps I should be grateful to fate and rain. Catherine stood, moving to the window. You were never truly present. Even before that night, you were always somewhere else mentally. I assumed it was business. But now I understand you were half alive. Going through motions of a life you didn't want. Catherine, I never meant to hurt you. Didn't you? Or did you simply never think about whether I might be hurt? She turned to face him. You're not cruel. But you're extraordinarily self-absorbed. It took illegitimate children to wake you up to the fact that other people have feelings that should matter. The words stung because they were true. You're right. I've been selfish. Cowardly. And now? Now I'm trying to be better. Someone my children deserve. Catherine studied his face. Do you love her? Edward thought about Mary's fierce strength, her sacrifice. Yes. I think I never stopped. Then I hope she's worth it. Because you're about to lose everything else. My mother will make certain of that. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Elizabeth Whitmore deployed her social influence with surgical precision. Within days, carefully crafted versions spread through London society. The Duke of Harrington had broken his engagement to pursue a shameful relationship with a common woman. He'd fathered illegitimate children, twins, and was now openly acknowledging them. By week's end, Edward had been uninvited from 3 social events. 2 business partners withdrew from investments, citing concerns about the Duke's judgment. His club membership was placed under review. But the worst came one afternoon on Bond Street. Edward was leaving his solicitor's office when he encountered Lord Pembroke and two other former friends outside a gentleman's club. "Harrington!" Pembroke called loudly, drawing attention from passers-by. "Or should I say, the Duke of Fools?" Edward stopped, his jaw tightening. "Tell us," Pembroke continued, his voice carrying deliberately. "Is it true you've thrown away your life for a whore and her bastards?" The word hit Edward like a physical blow. Around them, pedestrians slowed, sensing confrontation. "You will not speak of her that way," Edward said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Why not? What else do you call a woman who spreads her legs for a duke and then tries to trap him with pregnancy?" Edward's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed to defend Mary's honor with violence. But he thought of John and Anne. What kind of man did he want to be for them? "I call her," Edward said clearly, his voice carrying, "the bravest woman I've ever known. She carried my children alone rather than trap me in obligation. She raised them in poverty because she believed they deserved better than a father who resented them. And if you cannot understand that kind of selfless love, then I pity you, Pembroke." He turned and walked away, ignoring the stunned silence behind him. But the encounter left him shaking. Not with anger, with understanding. This was the price. Public humiliation. Lost friendships. Destroyed reputation. And he would pay it gladly. William visited that evening, one of the few who hadn't distanced himself. "You've lost your mind," William said. "That's the only explanation." "Probably." "Why?" "For a woman who wants nothing from you and children who don't know you." Edward thought carefully. "Have you ever truly held a baby? They're terrifying. So small, completely dependent. Everything you do matters. For 6 months, my children existed without me. And they were fine." Mary made certain of that. "But I lost something. I lost seeing John's first smile. Anne's first laugh. All those moments that make up a life. So this is guilt?" "No. It's understanding what my father tried to tell me, that none of this matters." Edward gestured around them. "The titles, the money, the reputation. None of it means anything if you're alone at the end. And I was alone. I just didn't realize it until I understood what I'd been missing." William shook his head. "You really love her?" "I do. And even if she never forgives me, it will be a better life than the empty one I was living." "You're either the bravest man I know or the biggest fool." "Probably both." That Thursday, Edward arrived at Rose Court to find Mary with a newspaper. "You broke your engagement," she said, holding up the paper. "They're calling you reckless, unstable. They say you've destroyed your reputation for," she paused, reading a passing fancy with a woman of no consequence. "You're not of no consequence. That's not the point." Mary's eyes flashed with fear beneath anger. "Do you understand what you've done? The attention this brings? The scandal that will be attached to these children for their entire lives? Or they'll grow up knowing their father chose them openly rather than hiding them in shame. You didn't consult me. You didn't ask if I wanted this attention. You just made a grand gesture." "You're right." Edward cut her off. "You're completely right. I made a decision that affects you and the children without discussing it. That was wrong." Mary looked at the newspaper, then back at him. "Do you understand what this means? People will be watching constantly. Judging. The children will grow up with this scandal attached to them. Or they'll grow up knowing their father fought for them. That love mattered more than reputation." Edward stepped closer. "I can't undo the past. But I can make certain John and Anne never doubt they're wanted. That they're chosen. That their father fought for them instead of hiding them away." Mary's composure started to crack. "You could still lose everything. Your grandmother might disinherit you entirely. Society might never accept you back. Mary. Edward reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Do you know what I've realized? I was already losing everything. I was losing my humanity, my capacity to feel, my ability to love anything beyond duty. My father warned me about that path. But holding John, seeing and smile, it's like waking up. Tears shimmered in Mary's eyes. This is where you tell me you love me. Yes. I don't want pretty words. I want consistency. I want you to show up every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday for the next year. For the next 5 years. For the rest of their childhood. If you love them, prove it with presence. I will. And me? Her voice dropped to a whisper. What about me? Do you love me because I'm the mother of your children? Or because you actually want me? Because I won't be your consolation prize. Edward cupped her face. Mary Hayes, I have loved you since you challenged me about the poor 3 years ago. I loved you when I was too cowardly to choose you. I loved you every day we were apart. And I love you now not because you're the mother of my children, but because you're the bravest, strongest, most extraordinary woman I've ever known. That's a lot of pretty words. Then let me prove them with actions. Move into Harrington Hall. Not as my mistress, but as the mother of my children and the woman I intend to marry if you'll have me. Mary pulled back. Edward, we can't. The scandal is already happening. Let it happen where you're safe and don't have to worry about rent or food. I don't need you to rescue me. I know. But let me support you while you figure out if I'm someone you could love again. Please. From inside, and began crying. Then John. Mary looked torn between the conversation and her children. Go, Edward said. Take care of them. I'll be here when you come back. And I'll keep being here, Mary. Every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Until you believe me. Edward arrived for his Thursday visit 6 weeks into his regular schedule to find Rose Court in chaos. Mrs. Cooper met him at the entrance, her face drawn. Thank God. The fever spreading. 3 families on the 2nd floor, now Mary's little John. Edward's blood turned to ice. John is ill? How long? Since yesterday evening. Edward took the stairs 3 at a time. He found Mary still in yesterday's dress, her hair falling from its pins. She was holding John against her chest while Anne lay in the cradle, asleep. John's face was flushed bright red, his breathing labored and wrong, his tiny body radiating heat. Edward, Mary said, her voice breaking. I didn't know if you'd come. I'm here. How long? Since last night. The fever won't break. I've been sponging him with cool water but nothing helps. Mrs. Cooper said it's cholera spreading through the building. People are dying. Children younger than John have already. Her voice broke completely. Edward saw the terror in her eyes. The bone-deep exhaustion. The way her hands trembled as she held their son. Have you called a doctor? Mary's laugh was sharp, bitter. Doctors don't come to Clerkenwell for the poor. We can't pay their fees. And even if I could afford one, they're all busy with wealthy patients. We're on our own, Edward. We've always been on our own. Edward's jaw tightened. Not anymore. I'm getting Dr. Samuel Bennett. He's the best physician in London. Edward, the expense. Damn the expense. He was already moving. Mrs. Cooper, stay with Mary. I'll return within the hour. Edward raced through London streets. He found Dr. Bennett treating patients in his Mayfair surgery. Dr. Bennett, I need you in Clerkenwell immediately. The doctor blinked at the Duke, appearing disheveled. Your Grace, I don't make house calls to. My son is dying of fever. Possibly cholera. He's 6 months old and he's in Clerkenwell and I need you there now. Something in Edward's voice cut through. Your son? I wasn't aware. Does it matter? Will you let a 6-month-old child die because his father isn't married to his mother? Dr. Bennett hesitated. Edward could see the calculation, entering an epidemic zone during a cholera outbreak. I'll pay triple your normal fee. More if necessary. Name any price. It's not about the fee. Then what? Is my son's life worth less because of where he lives? Edward's voice rose. He's 6 months old. He has my eyes and his mother's courage, and he deserves the same chance at life as any wealthy man's legitimate heir. Will you help him or not? Dr. Bennett studied Edward's face, then grabbed his bag. The journey back took 30 agonizing minutes. When they arrived, John's condition had worsened. The baby seemed barely conscious, his tiny body limp. He's worse, Mary whispered, hollow with fear. So much worse. Dr. Bennett examined John with swift efficiency, then Anne, who was beginning to show early symptoms. Cholera, he pronounced grimly. The boy is significantly further along. The girl is just beginning. I won't lie, at 6 months, their chances aren't good. Infants often don't survive. But their chances are better if we act immediately. He issued rapid instructions: boiled water, medications, careful monitoring. Someone needs to stay with them constantly. Day and night. Any change could be critical. They cannot be left alone. I'll stay, Edward said without hesitation. Your Grace, you'll be exposed. I don't care. These are my children and I'm staying. Mary looked at him with wonder breaking through exhaustion. Edward, you don't have to. Yes, I do. These are my children. Let me be their father when it matters most. What followed were 5 days and nights that felt like an entire lifetime. Edward stayed. He didn't return to his townhouse or Harrington Hall. He slept when he slept in the chair, waking every hour to check on John and Anne, to help Mary administer medicines, to sponge their burning bodies. Mary collapsed from exhaustion on the 2nd day. Edward caught her before she hit the floor and laid her on the bed. Sleep. I'll watch them. I can't if something happens. I'll wake you instantly. But you can't help them if you collapse. Please. Trust me. She did, finally, surrendering to exhaustion. And Edward sat with both desperately sick babies while Mary slept her first full 3 hours in days. John's fever spiked that night to levels that made Dr. Bennett's expression turn grave. The baby began convulsing, his tiny body shaking uncontrollably in Edward's arms. Edward felt John's heart hammering against his chest like a trapped bird trying to escape. The baby's skin was so hot it felt like holding burning coals. His little back arched impossibly, every muscle rigid, his limbs jerking in ways that looked wrong, unnatural, terrifying. Talk to him, Dr. Bennett instructed while working frantically. Let him know you're there. Edward bent close to John's ear. Stay with me, son. Please, I'm begging you. I know you don't understand words yet, but your sister needs you desperately. Your mother needs you. And I need you, John. I've only just found you. I've only just started to know you. Don't leave yet. Please don't leave. His voice cracked completely. Tears he hadn't known he was crying fell onto John's burning skin. I've been a terrible father to you. Absent for every moment when you needed me most. But I'm here now and I'm staying, and I will spend every single day of your life making up for the ones I missed if you'll just give me the chance. He felt John's body seize again, more violently this time. The baby's eyes rolled back. His breathing stopped for what felt like an eternity before resuming in shallow, desperate gasps. Please, John. Please stay. Fight just a little longer. Mary woke to find Edward crying over their son, his whole body shaking. She came to him immediately, wrapping her arms around both of them. He's fighting so hard, Edward whispered. He's so impossibly small, but he's fighting with everything he has. He's a Harrington. Stubborn as his father. They held each other and both children through that endless, terrible night. Anne's condition worsened dramatically on the third day. Now both twins were critically ill. Edward and Mary took turns, one holding John, one holding Anne, switching when their arms gave out. Dr. Bennett visited 3 times daily, bringing more medicines, adjusting treatments. All we can do is support them while their bodies fight. They have to find the strength themselves. On the 4th morning, Mrs. Cooper brought devastating news. 2 children in the building had died overnight from the fever. Both younger than John and Anne. Mary heard and began to cry silently, great shuddering sobs that racked her body but that she tried to muffle so she wouldn't disturb the babies. Edward wrapped his arms around her and the children, feeling utterly helpless. All his wealth, his title, his authority, none of it mattered. He couldn't save his children through force of will or money. He could only hold them and hope and pray. That night, alone with the babies while Mary finally slept from sheer exhaustion, Edward prayed more desperately than he ever had in his life. "Please," he whispered into the darkness. "I know I have no right to ask anything. I've lived selfishly and made terrible choices and hurt people who deserved better. But these children, they're completely innocent. Mary is innocent. If there's any mercy anywhere in the universe, please let them live." His voice broke. "Take anything you want from me, my title, my wealth, my comfortable life, my own life if necessary. But please let my children live. Please. I'm begging you." He looked down at John and his arms, so small, so fragile, fighting so hard against something he didn't understand. "I'll be better," Edward whispered. "I'll be the father they deserve. I'll be the man Mary needs. Just please, please let them live long enough for me to prove it." In that moment, holding his dying son, Edward understood something fundamental. This was love. Not the comfortable emotion he'd felt for Catherine. Not even the passionate romance he'd shared with Mary before. This was love that burned everything else away, love that made you willing to trade your own life for another's. This was what his father had tried to tell him. This was what he'd been missing. And he might lose it before ever truly having it. Stop scrolling. Stop everything. If you're not crying right now, we don't know what to tell you. This is real. This is what love actually costs. Not pretty words or grand gestures, but showing up in the darkest moments when everything is falling apart. If this story is wrecking you, if you understand why Edward is on his knees begging for his children's lives, then you need to do something. Like this video right now. Subscribe to this channel. Comment below and tell us the last time a story made you feel this much. Because stories like this only reach people when you share them. And right now, someone needs to hear this. Don't let them miss it because you didn't click. Now, let's see if the children survive. Dawn broke on the 5th day. Edward woke from an exhausted doze to find John looking at him with clear eyes for the first time in 5 days. The fever had broken. When Edward touched the baby's forehead with trembling hands, he found cool skin instead of burning heat. John's breathing was normal. "Mary," Edward said urgently, his voice cracking. "Mary, wake up. Look at John." Anne's fever had also broken during those miraculous pre-dawn hours. Both twins were pale and weak, but the immediate crisis had passed. Mary touched their foreheads with shaking hands, unable to believe it. Then she looked at Edward with such profound relief and gratitude that his chest ached. "They're going to be all right," she whispered. "Our children are going to be all right. Our children. Not my children. Our children." Edward pulled Mary into his arms while John and Anne slept peacefully between them for the first time in 5 days, and they cried together with relief that comes after surviving something you were certain would destroy you. Dr. Bennett confirmed it, with rest and care, both would recover fully. They're remarkably resilient. You're very fortunate. After he left, Edward and Mary sat in exhausted silence. You stayed, Mary said finally. For 5 days without leaving once. Where else would I be? Living your life. Managing your affairs. This is my life. You are my life. They are my life. Everything else is just details. Mary looked at their hands intertwined, then at John and Anne, then back at Edward. I was wrong about you, she said quietly. 2 years ago when you ended our relationship, I thought I knew who you were. A man who would always choose duty over love. You weren't wrong. That's who I was. But not anymore? Edward thought about the past 5 days, the terror, the prayers, John's hand gripping his finger. Not anymore. I don't know who I am now. But I know who I want to become. Someone worthy of you. Someone worthy of them. Mary squeezed his hand. The cottage at Harrington Hall. Tell me about it again. And Edward did, his heart soaring with hope. The move to Harrington Hall's cottage happened 3 weeks later, after John and Anne had fully recovered. Edward had thought everything was finally falling into place. Mary and the twins were safe in the cottage. He visited daily. The routine felt solid, permanent. Then came the test he didn't see coming. 8 weeks into living at the cottage, Edward received an urgent message from his business partner. A crucial negotiation in London required his immediate presence. If he didn't attend the meeting Tuesday morning, they'd lose a significant investment opportunity worth thousands of pounds. Tuesday morning. His scheduled visit with the twins. Edward stared at the message, his stomach churning. It was just one visit. Surely Mary would understand. It was business, important business. He could make it up to them on Thursday. He sent a note to the cottage Tuesday morning. Urgent business matter requires my presence in London. We'll visit Thursday instead. My apologies. Mary read the note 3 times, her hands shaking. And was in her lap, playing with her fingers. John was attempting to pull himself up on the furniture, grunting with effort. Urgent business matter. She'd known this would happen. Known that eventually, something would be more important. That he'd start finding reasons to miss visits. That he'd prove her fears correct. Mrs. Cooper found her an hour later, sitting on the floor with both babies, crying silently. What's wrong, dear? Mary handed her the note. Mrs. Cooper read it, her expression hardening. Men. I knew better, Mary whispered. I knew better than to trust him. Than to believe he'd actually changed. What will you do? Mary looked at John and her children, her responsibility, her whole world. I'll protect them. Like I always have. Edward arrived Thursday morning at precisely 10 o'clock, carrying an expensive toy horse he'd purchased in London as an apology. Mary opened the door, her expression cold. We need to talk, she said. Outside. Mrs. Cooper is watching the children. Edward's stomach dropped. Mary. Outside. They walked to the edge of the cottage garden. Mary turned to face him, her arms crossed. You missed Tuesday. I know. I sent a note explaining. I don't care about your note. Mary's voice was shaking. Do you remember what I told you at Rose Court? If you miss a single visit without a legitimate emergency, you're done. It was an emergency. A business negotiation. A business negotiation? Mary's voice rose. Edward, that's not an emergency. An emergency is illness or injury or death. An emergency is not my business partners need me. This was important. More important than your children? More important than your word? Mary's eyes filled with tears. This is exactly what I feared. Exactly what I knew would happen. Eventually, something would matter more. Eventually, you'd start finding reasons why you couldn't make it. It was one visit. One time in 8 weeks. It's never just one time. That's how it starts. One missed visit becomes two. Two becomes missing every time something important comes up. And eventually, you're just like every other absent father who convinces himself he's providing for his children while never actually being present for them. That's not fair. Isn't it? Mary's voice broke. My father was a vicar. Do you know how many men I watched make promises to their families and break them? How many children I saw grow up knowing their fathers chose work over them? I won't let that happen to John and Anne. I won't. Mary, please. Don't come back. The words hit Edward like a physical blow. What? You heard me. Don't come back to this cottage. Don't visit the children. Don't send notes or gifts or apologies. Just don't. You can't keep them from me. Watch me. Mary's voice was steel. You had your chance. You had 8 weeks to prove you meant what you said. And the first time something inconvenient happened, you chose business over them. So no. You don't get to keep doing this. You don't get to break their hearts in small pieces over years. It was one meeting. It's always one thing. Always just this once. But it's never just once, is it? Mary wiped her eyes angrily. I would rather raise them alone, in poverty, knowing they can count on me absolutely, than raise them with you teaching them that love is conditional on convenience. Mary, I love them. Then you should have been here Tuesday. You should have told your business partners that your children come first. But you didn't. You chose exactly what I knew you would eventually choose. She turned toward the cottage. Mary, please. I'm begging you. Don't do this. Let me prove. You had your chance to prove it. Mary's voice was empty now, all the fight gone. Just devastated resignation. And you failed. I'm sorry, Edward. I really am. But I have to protect them. Even from you. She walked back into the cottage and closed the door. Edward stood in the garden, his carefully constructed new life crumbling around him. He'd lost them. Not to poverty or illness or society's judgment. He'd lost them through his own choice. His own inability to fully commit when it actually cost him something. For 3 days, Edward existed in a fog of self-recrimination. He'd gone to that meeting. Secured the investment. Made money that suddenly meant nothing. He'd chosen wrong. William found him in his study on the 3rd day, staring at nothing. You look terrible. She won't let me see them. The woman in the cottage? Mary. Her name is Mary. And she's right to keep them from me. I failed them. I failed her. I proved every fear she had about me was justified. William sat down across from him. What happened? Edward explained. The missed visit. The business meeting. Mary's ultimatum. So you missed one visit in 2 months, William said carefully. That seems extreme. No. It's not. Edward's voice was hollow. She gave me one rule. One absolute boundary. And the first time it was inconvenient, I broke it. She was testing whether I'd actually changed. And I failed. So what will you do? Edward looked at his friend. I don't know if there's anything I can do. Maybe some mistakes can't be fixed. Do you believe that? I don't know what I believe anymore. The answer came on the 4th day, in the middle of the night, when Edward couldn't sleep. He thought about his father. About all the times Charles Harrington had chosen work over his son. All the promises broken for important business. All the moments missed that could never be recovered. His father had died with regrets. Had told Edward on his deathbed that none of it mattered. Edward had listened. But he hadn't truly understood. Until now. He got up, dressed, and left for the cottage before dawn. Mary answered the door in her nightgown, a baby on her hip and, from the auburn hair. Edward, what? I need to say something. Please. Just let me say this. Mary's expression was wary, but she didn't close the door. You were right, Edward said. About everything. I chose business over my children. I broke the one promise I made to you. I proved that I haven't changed enough. If you came here for forgiveness, I didn't. I came to tell you that you were right to draw that line. Right to protect them from me until I prove I actually deserve to be their father. Mary blinked, surprised. But I'm not giving up, Edward continued. I will be here every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 10 o'clock. I will stand outside this cottage for my full hour, whether you let me in or not. I will be here in rain and cold and whatever else comes. Because you're right, consistency is the only thing that matters. So I'm going to be consistent. Even if all I can do is stand outside and prove I showed up. Edward. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking to see them. I'm just telling you, I will be here. Every single time. For as long as it takes. He turned to leave, then stopped. And Mary? I resigned from that business partnership this morning. Sent a letter ending my involvement entirely. Because you were right about that too. If I can't choose my children over business, then I don't deserve to have both. He walked away before she could respond. For 2 weeks, Edward kept his promise. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. 10 o'clock. He stood outside the cottage for exactly 1 hour. He didn't knock. Didn't call out. Just stood there, proving he'd shown up. Rain came. He stood in it. Cold wind. He endured it. On the 5th visit, the second Tuesday, Mary opened the door after 30 minutes. You're going to catch pneumonia standing in the rain. Then I'll catch pneumonia. But I'll be here. This is ridiculous. This is me proving I mean what I say. Mary stared at him for a long moment. Then closed the door. But on Thursday, she opened it after 15 minutes. You can come in. But you don't get to hold them. You just sit. And watch. Edward came in, soaked from the rain. He sat in the chair Mary indicated. John and were on a blanket on the floor, playing with wooden blocks. They looked up when he entered. John's face broke into a huge smile. He began crawling toward Edward. No, Mary said gently, redirecting John. Not yet, sweetheart. John looked confused. Then hurt. He began to cry. Edward's heart shattered. But he stayed in his chair. I'm here, John, he said softly. I'm here and I'm staying. I'm so sorry I left before. But I'm here now. And was watching him solemnly. She crawled over to her brother and patted his back, trying to comfort him. Edward sat there for an hour, watching his children but not allowed to touch them. It was the hardest hour of his life. But he understood why. Mary was teaching him and them that love meant more than showing up. It meant earning trust. Proving reliability. It took 6 more visits before Mary let him hold them again. When she finally did, when she handed Anne to him after 3 weeks of watching from a distance, Edward cried. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for giving me another chance. This is your last one, Mary said quietly. If you break their trust again, there won't be another. I know. I won't. I swear it. And he meant it with every fiber of his being. 6 months passed. Edward never missed another visit. Business emergencies came up. He sent partners to handle them. Social obligations arose. He declined them all. Nothing, absolutely nothing, took precedence over Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday at 10 o'clock. Gradually, Mary softened. Began trusting him again. Began believing his transformation was real. Mary struggled with accepting help. When Sarah, a young maid, offered to watch the twins, she refused 3 times before Edward intervened. "Mary, let Sarah help. You haven't slept more than 4 hours at a stretch in 8 months. But they're my responsibility. They're our responsibility. Accepting help doesn't make you less of a mother. It makes you human." Edward restructured his life around the cottage. Early breakfast with the family. Morning estate business during naps. Return for midday feeding. Evening play with the twins. William visited once, shook his head at the modest cottage. "You're actually happy." Deliriously so. But consequences continued. Edward's solicitor brought troubling news: the dowager had restricted trust funds. Edward's liquid wealth was now perhaps 1/3 of what it had been. "Can I maintain the cottage? Provide for Mary and the children?" "Yes. But the lavish lifestyle? I'm selling the London townhouse." Mary overheard. "You're losing your fortune because of us." "I'm not losing anything that matters." Edward pulled her close. "I have enough. The estate generates income. Our children are healthy. You're here. What else could I need?" As autumn turned to winter, the twins changed rapidly. At 9 months, John started pulling himself up on furniture. And babbled constantly. One evening during bath time, and looked at Edward and said clearly, "Duh." Edward froze. "Mary, did you hear? She's been practicing all day." "Duh," and repeated, reaching for him with wet hands. Edward felt tears prick his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. Duh. Always." John pulled himself up and announced, "Ma." Mary laughed, catching him. Later that night, Mary set down her sewing. "We haven't discussed what this is. What we are." Edward knelt beside her chair. "What do you want us to be?" "I don't know. Part of me wants what we had before. But we're different now." "You're right. What we had before was secret and rushed. But what we could have now could be honest. Built on knowing each other at our worst and still choosing each other." "That sounds like a proposal." "It's not. Not yet." Edward smiled. "When I propose, I want you to be absolutely certain. I want you to know I choose you not because of the children, but because you're the person I want beside me for the rest of my life." "How long until that will be?" "I don't know. But I'm patient." Winter deepened. On Christmas morning, they woke to John and Anne's excited babbling. Edward had commissioned simple wooden toys. Mary had knitted tiny stockings. They spent the day playing on the floor, singing carols. That evening, by the fire, Edward said, "This is the best Christmas I've ever had." "Better than elaborate parties?" "Incomparably better." He pulled her close. "Last year I was planning my engagement to Catherine. Going through motions. Desperately lonely without knowing it. And now? Now I'm exactly where I belong." Mary rested her head on his shoulder. "I fought so hard against letting you in. Against believing you'd changed. Do you believe it now?" "I'm starting to." She turned to look at him. "These past months, watching you, you've become someone I didn't know existed. Someone patient and present and willing to fail repeatedly if it means learning something important." "Does that mean?" "Not yet. But soon. Very soon, Edward. I'll wait however long it takes." Outside, snow fell. Inside, Edward and Mary sat by the fire, their children sleeping nearby, and felt contentment that comes from being exactly where you're meant to be. The following spring, when wildflowers bloomed and John and Anne took their first steps, Mary would give her answer. But tonight, hope was enough. 2 years later. The parish church near Harrington Hall was small and intimate, nothing like the grand cathedral wedding Edward would have had with Catherine Whitmore. Only 30 guests occupied the simple wooden pews, close friends, Mary's father beaming with quiet pride, estate workers, Mrs. Cooper crying openly, and William looking bemused but genuinely happy. The Dowager Duchess Margaret Harrington sat in the front row, expression unreadable. She had arrived unexpectedly the day before, announced she would attend, and offered no explanation. Edward stood at the altar. William leaned over. Last chance to run. Not a chance. The doors opened. Mary appeared in cream silk, carrying wildflowers. Walking beside her were John and now 2.5. John carried the rings. And scattered petals, giggling as some landed on guests' heads. Mary reached the altar breathless. Sorry. And tried to eat the flowers. She has excellent taste. When it came time for vows, Edward spoke words he'd written. Mary Hayes, you taught me that duty without heart is cowardice. That love requires courage I didn't know I possessed. You've made me better by believing I could become better. I promise to choose you and our children every single day. To be present when it's easy and especially when it's difficult. To build a life measured not by wealth, but by whether the people I love feel loved. Mary's voice trembled. Edward Harrington, you were not the man I needed 2 years ago. But you became him. That transformation is the greatest gift, even greater than our children. I promise to trust you with my heart, to build a life based on honesty rather than perfection, and to remind you on difficult days why you made the choices you did. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, John shouted "Da!" and clapped. Edward kissed his wife, and felt rightness that had been missing his entire life. The reception was held at the cottage garden, joyful, warm. Catherine Whitmore attended with her husband, Robert Fielding. She approached Mary. Mrs. Harrington. I wanted to wish you well. Mary looked uncertain. Lady Catherine. Just Catherine. I'm not a lady anymore. She smiled. And I've never been happier. Robert loves me without needing me to be perfect. I'm sorry if. Don't apologize. You did me a favor. He needed to break to become whole. I wasn't the person who could help him. You were. Before the wedding scene concludes, the grandmother's crucial visit. 3 weeks before the wedding, Margaret had requested to visit the cottage. I'd like to meet my great-grandchildren properly, she said stiffly. Mary and Edward exchanged glances. Of course. Margaret arrived the next day. When she entered and saw John and Anne playing on the floor, something in her expression softened. John looked up at her with solemn Harrington eyes. He studied her for a long moment, then crawled over and pulled himself up on her skirts. Well, Margaret said, looking down at him. You have excellent taste in support structures. And crawled over and offered Margaret a wooden block. For me? How generous. Mary watched, amazed, as the formidable Dowager Duchess sat down on the floor to play with the twins. He is Charles's eyes, Margaret said quietly, watching John. My son. Your father, Edward. The same solemn expression. Do you see it too? Edward asked. How could I not? Margaret touched John's soft hair gently. Charles used to look at me exactly like this when he was trying to understand something. Before I. She trailed off. And climbed into Margaret's lap without hesitation. She's not afraid of you, Mary observed, surprised. Children sense things adults miss, Margaret said. She looked at Edward and Mary. I was wrong about many things. But I won't be wrong about them. They deserve better than the childhood I gave your father. When she left, she paused at the door. The wedding. I'll be there. And I'll make it clear to anyone who questions it that these children are Harringtons. Back at the reception. Later, Margaret requested a private word. Grandmother, Edward said carefully. Thank you for coming. You're still my grandson. Margaret turned to Mary. Mrs. Harrington. I won't pretend I approved. You bring no connections, no wealth. Mary lifted her chin. I'm aware. I wasn't finished. You bring something I thought this family had lost, the ability to love without calculation. My son Edward's father, I trained that out of him. I made him miserable. She paused. I won't make that mistake with Edward. She pulled out an envelope. The trust funds I reallocated. They're restored. Not as reward, but as acknowledgement that you've proven you can manage wealth without it corrupting judgment. Edward stared. Grandmother. Don't argue. Use it wisely. Build something good. Margaret stood. One more thing. I'd like to know my great-grandchildren properly. May I visit? Of course, Mary said. Your family. Margaret's stern expression softened. Family. Yes. I suppose I am. That evening, after guests departed and the twins were asleep, Edward and Mary stood in the garden watching fireflies. Are you happy? Edward asked. Deliriously so. Are you? More than I imagined possible. He pulled her close. Do you remember what you said? That you didn't want to be my consolation prize? I remember. You never were. You're the choice I should have had the courage to make from the beginning. Mary kissed him softly. You were always worthy. You just didn't know it yet. From inside came Anne's cry, having discovered her parents weren't visible. Our daughter has timing, Mary observed. They found Anne standing in her crib, tears streaming but expression more annoyed than distressed. John remained asleep despite his sister's volume. Come here, darling, Edward lifted Anne and she settled immediately. See? We're right here. We're always right here. Mary smoothed John's hair. Both of you. Always. Watching Edward rock and Mary felt gratitude so intense it took her breath. 2 years ago, she'd been alone in Clerkenwell, terrified, certain she'd made the right choice but uncertain if she could survive it. Now she stood in a comfortable cottage, married to a man who'd proven his love through consistent presence, raising children who were genuinely wanted and cherished. It wasn't perfect. Edward still occasionally tried to solve problems with money. Mary still struggled with accepting help. John had a stubborn streak. And could manipulate situations by being adorable. But it was real. And it was theirs. Later, lying together, Mary asked quietly, Do you ever regret it? Everything you gave up? Edward turned to face her. Every single day, I think about it. Mary's breath caught. Edward. Every single day, I'm grateful I gave it up. Every morning when John wakes me by climbing onto the bed. Every time and laughs. Every moment you smile at me. That's when I think about what my life would have been, and I'm grateful I found courage to choose differently. I love you. I know I don't say it enough. But I do. I love you too. Thank you for giving me the chance to become a man our children can be proud of. Outside, summer night sounds filled the air. Inside, their family slept peacefully. 2 years ago, Edward had seen Mary in the rain and his world had stopped. As he drifted to sleep, he thought about his father's deathbed regret about being alone. Edward would never know that loneliness. He had Mary. He had John and Anne. He had a life built on love instead of duty, on courage instead of comfort. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. If you're not crying right now, check your pulse. This is what real love looks like, built through failure, through second chances, through showing up even when you don't get to hold them. If this story reminded you what matters, if it made you think about your own choices, then you need to share it. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. And comment below, have you ever gotten a second chance you didn't deserve? Because stories like this only reach people when you share them. Someone needs this today. Don't let them miss it. 10 years later. The library at Harrington Hall was Edward's favorite room. Today, he sat with John, now 12, reviewing ledgers. Why do we give so much to the tenant farmers? John asked, frowning. If we kept more, we'd be wealthier. Edward smiled. This was the conversation he'd waited for. We could. But tell me, what is wealth for? Security? Maintaining the estate? True. But there are different kinds of security. Financial security is one. But there's also the security of knowing the people who work your land are healthy, fed, educated. That when there's a poor harvest, they won't lose everything. John considered this. So you give money to make sure they're secure too? I invest in people. And people, when treated well, create value that returns in ways you can't measure in ledgers. Loyalty. Trust. Community. Those are worth more than pounds in accounts. What if they take advantage? Edward thought about Mary, struggling alone, refusing to ask for help. Most people don't ask unless they truly need it. And if someone occasionally takes advantage? I'd rather help 10 unnecessarily than refuse one who truly needs it. John nodded slowly. Is that why you and Mother established the hospital? The John and Hospital? Yes. We nearly lost you both to cholera. We don't want other families to face that terror without resources. Through the window, and was playing with her younger siblings Henry, 8, and Sarah, 6, teaching them some elaborate game involving running and shouting. Anne's going to be trouble, John observed. She gets that from your mother. Mother says from you. Edward laughed. We both claim credit. Mary appeared, breathless from chasing Sarah. Your daughter just convinced Cook to give her an entire plum cake by explaining it was for educational purposes. And did she teach Sarah about sharing? They ate it together. Education accomplished. Edward wrapped an arm around his wife. Even after 12 years, the sight of her made his heart lift. You're staring, Mary observed. I do that sometimes. John made a face. You're both embarrassing. I'm going to find Father's old ledgers from before he met you. After John left, Edward pulled Mary into his arms. How was the hospital board meeting? Successful. We've secured funding for a second location in Clerkenwell. Mary paused. I drove past Rose Court. The building's been torn down. They're building new housing. Do you ever wish we could go back? Tell your younger self everything would work out? No. If I'd known, I wouldn't have developed the strength to survive. That struggle made me who I am. She looked up. Do you regret how we started? Never. The difficult path led here. And here is exactly where I want to be. From the garden came a crash, followed by Sarah's shout and Anne's laughter. I should probably, Mary started. Let them work it out. They need to learn problem solving. When did you become so wise? About 10 years ago, when a stubborn vicar's daughter taught me that love means showing up even when you don't know what you're doing. Margaret Harrington entered, now in her early 80s but still formidable. Where are my great-grandchildren? In the garden, likely destroying something. Excellent. I'll join them. She paused. Edward, I was wrong about many things. But I was right about one, the Harrington legacy matters. I just didn't understand what that legacy should be. What do you mean? Margaret gestured toward the garden. That. Children who know they're loved. A family built on choice rather than obligation. And a state that serves its people. That's legacy. Your father never understood it. But you've built it. After Margaret left, Edward and Mary stood at the window. Do you remember what you said at Rose Court? That being a father is choosing them every day? I remember. It's still true. Some days are harder. But choosing them choosing you, it's the only choice that ever made sense. Mary leaned against him. You've come a long way from the man who thought duty was more important than love. I learned from an excellent teacher. Who? A woman who raised twins alone rather than trap their father in obligation. She taught me that real love gives freedom instead of demanding it. Mary's eyes glistened. That woman was terrified every day. But she'd do it all again if it led here. Here was 4 children playing, a marriage built on truth, an estate managed with compassion, a life measured in moments of connection rather than wealth. From the garden, "Father. Come quick. Henry thinks he can climb the oak tree." Edward exchanged a look with Mary. "Someone responsible should supervise," Mary said. "That's us. Together." They walked out together, toward their children, toward the life they'd built from broken pieces and brave choices. Behind them, Harrington Hall stood solid, a legacy built on stone and history. But the real legacy was running through the gardens, laughing in the twilight, secure in knowing they were loved not for what they represented, but for who they were. And that legacy would endure long after the stone had crumbled to dust. You made it to the end. You stayed for the whole journey, the poverty, the crisis, the failure, the redemption. That means something. Stories like this take hours to craft with care, research, and heart. If it was worth your time, if it changed how you see sacrifice, second chances, or what real love costs, then it's worth a like. It's worth subscribing. It's worth commenting below and telling us, what moment broke you? When did you start crying? Because we read every single comment. You're not just a viewer. You're part of why we tell these stories. And right now, someone is scrolling, about to skip this story. Don't let them. Share it. Because they need to know that real love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. It's about choosing what matters over what's easy. See you in the next story. Until then, choose love.